The last time Commander Marin Ashvale left the Redstone Basin, 3 of her crew died. That was 7 years ago, before the Quarathi came. Before the sky turned the color of a wound and ships the size of moons parked themselves above every major city on Earth and started broadcasting in 17 languages that humans were, by galactic consensus, a protected species. Protected. Like they were songbirds in a nature reserve. Like the whole of human civilization. Every war, every cathedral, every late-night argument about whether love was real or just electrochemistry had been quietly recategorized as a conservation project. Marin had laughed when she heard it. A short, flat sound. Not because it was funny. Because she didn't know what else to do with something that enormous. Now she sat in the kitchen of the bunker that used to be their home and watched her daughter draw maps. Asha was 11. She had her father's ears and Marin's stubborn jaw, and a habit of narrating everything she was doing in a low, steady murmur, like a scientist documenting an experiment. She was drawing the same map she always drew, a long, sprawling chart of the eastern corridor from Redstone to the coast, dotted with symbols she'd invented herself. A small star for water sources, a triangle for ruins where a person might shelter, a jagged line for what she called the soft zones, places where the Quarathi signal was weak, where the surveillance drones flew lazy circles instead of tight ones. You've added the old freight tunnels, Marin said. Asha didn't look up. They go all the way to the marshlands. If you know where to break through. How do you know where to break through? Talked to Orin. He walked half of it before his ankle. Marin looked at the map. Asha had been making versions of it since she was 8, since the year the Quarathi cataloged every human settlement above 50 people, and issued what they called a stability designation. In practice, stability designation meant you stayed where you were. The Quarathi weren't cruel about it. That was the strangest part. They brought medicine. They fixed the water table in 3 continents. They were deeply, sincerely committed to the well-being of the humans in their care. They just also believed, with the serene confidence of a species that had been managing biospheres for 40,000 years, that the worst thing you could do for a protected species was let it wander. Marin's brother Joran lived on the coast. She hadn't seen him in 4 years. You know we can't go, Marin said. Asha looked up. Her eyes were her father's too. That particular shade of brown that looked almost amber when the light caught it right. You always say that, because it's always been true. Orin says there are people who go. He says whole families have gone through the freight tunnels, and the Quarathi don't even. Orin's ankle healed badly, and his judgment healed worse. Marin stood up. Eat something. She walked to the window. Outside, the sky was doing what it always did now at dusk, going a deep bruised purple as the Quarathi atmospheric processors cycled down for the night. It was beautiful, in the way that a cage made of gold was beautiful. Marin had stopped pointing that out. It took energy she didn't have. Her husband Pell came in from the corridor smelling of machine oil. He'd spent the afternoon with the community's power cells, which were dying at a rate no one wanted to calculate. He read her face the way he always did. A quick scan, 2 seconds, filed and said nothing. He poured water into 2 cups and set one in front of Asha without being asked. A family from the Eastern Bloc left last week, he said quiet. Not for Asha's benefit, just because large things deserve to be said quietly. The Drennans took their kids. 3 of them. Marin turned from the window. And nothing yet. No signal from the Quarathi about it. No punishment protocols. Just, he shrugged, gone. She looked at him for a long time. What she understood about fear, what 7 years in the field and 1 catastrophic ambush in the Redstone ravines had taught her, was that it was not the enemy of good decisions. Fear was data. Fear said this matters. Fear said you have something to lose. The error was in letting fear become the whole map, letting it crowd out every other piece of information until all you could see was the danger and none of the route. She had made that error once. She'd held her crew back from a position they could have taken, because she was afraid of what she didn't know. The Quarathi hadn't even been involved. That had been a different enemy entirely, and 3 people were dead because she'd confused caution with wisdom. She was not going to make that error again. Show me the map, she said to Asha. Asha looked up. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise exactly, more like a person who has been braced for a wall and suddenly finds a door. She showed her the map. They left before dawn, the 4 of them. Marin, Pell, Asha and Marin's uncle Bertus, who was 71 years old, loudly opposed to the entire plan, and constitutionally incapable of letting his family go anywhere without him. Bertus had been a cartographer before the Quarathi came. He walked with a cane now, A beautiful ugly thing he'd made himself from a piece of the old radio tower. And he complained without pause, and with extraordinary creativity from the moment they descended into the freight tunnels until they emerged 2 hours later into the gray pre-dawn of the marshlands. "This is not what I imagined when I pictured dying," he said, surveying the landscape. "I pictured a bed, possibly a window. I pictured someone bringing me soup." "You're not dying," Marin said. "I'm 71 years old in a swamp before breakfast. Define dying." Asha took his free hand. He grumbled but didn't pull away. The marshlands were strange and quiet. The Quarathi had done something to the water table here that made the whole place luminous in the right conditions. A faint blue-green phosphorescence in the pools. The kind of light that had no source you could point to. It should have been eerie. Asha found it beautiful. She walked with her head tilted back, watching it, murmuring things under her breath that Marin couldn't quite catch. They were an hour in when the drone found them. Marin heard it before she saw it. A low, soft oscillation like a tuning fork struck against still air. She put her hand up. Everyone stopped. The drone descended through the mist. It was Quarathi built, which meant it was organic looking. All curved surfaces and passive sensors. Nothing that looked like a weapon. It hovered at eye level and turned its primary sensor toward Marin, and simply waited. The way Quarathi technology always waited. With a patience that was somehow more unsettling than any aggression would have been. Marin looked at it. She did not move. After 11 seconds she counted. It moved on. She felt Pell's hand briefly on her shoulder blade. Just a touch. Just, "I'm here." They kept moving. The first real trouble came in the ruins of the old freight depot, at the edge of what had been a small city. There were Quarathi there. Not drones but actual Quarathi. 3 of them. Running what looked like a census or a cataloging operation. Moving through the ruins with their equipment and their polite impersonal efficiency. The Quarathi were tall, pale-jointed, with faces that registered expression in a register humans couldn't quite read. The angles were almost right. Close enough to be unsettling, the way a reflection in moving water was almost right. They wore their caretaker designations on wristbands that pulsed soft amber. Marin took the family wide around them, through a section of collapsed roof that required Burtis to be half-carried and produced 15 minutes of sustained low-volume complaint. But they got through. "You've done this before," Pell said quietly when they were clear. "Trained for it, different context." "Same skill." She didn't answer, but she filed it. They made the river crossing by midday. The river was wide here and cold, running fast with the melt from the northern ranges. And Asha announced she needed a bathroom stop so urgently that it wasn't a discussion. They pulled up on the east bank under a stand of old willows, and while Asha disappeared into the brush, Burtis lowered himself onto a log with the specific dignity of a man who has earned the right to sit dramatically. "You know," he said, "I had a perfectly good map of the coast road, the old one, paper. We could have done this in daylight by road years ago if you'd asked me. You never offered. I never thought you'd go. You were so committed to being afraid." Marin sat down beside him. The river made its river sounds. A pair of birds, real birds, the old kind, worked the shallows 40 meters upstream. "I wasn't afraid," she said. Burtis looked at her sideways. "Not of the Quarathi," she amended. "Of what happens if something goes wrong, if I make the wrong call again." "Ah," he said. "Just that." She looked at the river. 3 people, Burtis. I know. I held back when I should have moved. I was reading the situation wrong. I thought I was being careful, and I was standing still because standing still felt like not deciding. "Standing still is always a decision," Burtis said. "Any cartographer will tell you. The map doesn't care if you move or not. Time moves. The terrain shifts. Standing still on a map that's changing is the same as walking backward." She had nothing to say to that. He was right. He was always right in the most inconvenient ways, and she had spent 30 years being grateful for it. Asha came back through the willows, wiping her hands on her hand trousers, and announced that she had seen something. What kind of something?" Marin said. "A person, I think. In the old water treatment building. There's smoke." Marin looked at Pell. "Worth checking," he said. "It was worth checking." The smoke was coming from a careful, controlled fire, the kind a trained person made, small and clean, positioned under a vent so it dispersed before it could be read on thermal. The person who'd made it was sitting beside it, eating something from a tin, and she looked up when they came through the door without particular alarm. She was maybe 60, broad-shouldered, with a scar along her left jaw that had the look of something surgical rather than accidental. She wore a jacket that had been repaired. So many times it was more patch than original fabric, and she had advised someone who had been living outside for a long time and had made her peace with it. Her name was Celine. She'd been moving along the eastern corridor for 2 years, she said. Alone since her partner died of a fever 6 months back, headed generally toward the coast, but not in any particular hurry. The Korathi leave you alone? Marin asked. Celine tilted her head. Mostly, I think they think I'm a scavenger category rather than a migration category. Different protocols. You know their protocols. I've been studying them for 2 years. You learn. She looked at Asha, who was studying her with the focused attention of a scientist encountering a new specimen. Your daughter? Yes, smart eyes. She gets it from her father. Celine ate more from her tin. She didn't offer to share, but she didn't ask them to leave either, which in the current economy of things was a kind of generosity. They stayed the night, taking turns on watch, and in the morning Celine packed her kit and looked at Marin and said, I know the road to the coast, both the road you can see and the road you can't. If you're going that way, I'll walk with you. Marin had learned, at considerable cost, to recognize the things she didn't know. She said yes. They hit the second Korathi station, 2 days out from the coast. This one was different from the census team in the ruins. This was a transfer station. One of the semi-permanent installations the Korathi had been building across the continent for the past 3 years. The ones that nobody in Redstone Basin had wanted to explain to their children. Because explaining it required first. Explaining that the Korathi's commitment to human welfare had a scope humans hadn't fully understood yet. Transfer stations processed stability designations. They were, in practical terms, the mechanism by which any human who strayed too far from their designated location was politely, efficiently, and irresistibly returned. The station sat across the only road through a 4-kilometer stretch of forest. There was no going around it. The forest on either side had been cleared to sensor range. Marin stood at the tree line and looked at it for a long time. There are 12 Korathi in there, Celine said. Maybe more. The rotation changed 3 weeks ago. You've been watching it. I've been watching all of them. Celine crouched and drew a rough diagram in the dirt. The sensor grid runs on a 40-second cycle. It checks each quadrant in sequence. The gap between the north quadrant completing and the east quadrant initiating is 4 seconds. That's not enough to get 6 people through. No. But there's a maintenance crawlway under the station foundations. The sensors don't cover it because the Korathi don't think underground. Their whole species evolved in elevated structures. Below ground reads to them as natural terrain, not movement corridor. She paused. I found it 6 months ago. I haven't used it because I've been alone and you can't hold a crawlway entrance open from inside. Pell looked at Marin. 4 people go through the crawlway. 2 hold the entrance. Swap. 3 goes through, 3 waits. Bertus doesn't crawl, Marin said. I can crawl, Bertus said. Not with that hip. I have done things with this hip that would, Bertus, he subsided. The crawlway was exactly as Celine described. Low, dark, running under the station's foundation slab, smelling of old concrete and something organic she couldn't name. Marin went first, pulling herself on her elbows, and she felt the weight of the station above her and the weight of the sky above that, and neither of them mattered. What mattered was the next meter of ground. Then the one after that. Asha went second, and Marin heard her murmuring her scientist's commentary behind her. Compacted soil. Mineral content suggests old riverbed. Approximately 40 centimeters ceiling clearance. I can hear something above us that sounds like. Shh, Marin said. Ventilation system, Asha whispered. Korathi prefer slightly lower oxygen partial pressure than humans do. Interesting. Pell went last. They emerged on the far side of the station into a drainage ditch, muddy and breathless, and lay still while Celine and Bertus crossed through the sensor gap, 30 seconds later. Bertus walking with a deliberate, unhurried dignity that was probably the most nerve-wracking 2 minutes of Marin's life. They were through. Pell sat in the drainage ditch and laughed. It was a quiet laugh, just a shaking of his shoulders, and Marin looked at him and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was wound tight. We're through, she said. We're through, he agreed. Asha was already updating her map. They made camp that night in the ruins of an old rest stop, and Celine produced, from somewhere in the depths of her pack, a battered metal flask that contained something warm and strong that she said was technically fruit-based and practically chemistry. She passed it to Bertus first because she had apparently already identified the correct social protocol for this group, and Bertus accepted it with the gravity of a man receiving a sacrament. My wife used to make something like this, he said after a moment. Mine too, Celine said. Different recipe. Same intention. They sat in the dark with the flask going around, and Marin listened to her daughter sleeping. Asha had been out within minutes of lying down, map still clutched in one hand. And she thought about her brother Joran on the coast, who had always been the brave one, who had always been the one to say yes before she'd finished formulating the question. She thought about what 4 years of silence felt like from both ends of it. The flask came around to her. She drank. It was terrible. It was perfect. "We're close," Celine said. "How close? Day and a half, maybe less if the morning fog holds. The Kwarathi drones fly low in fog, makes them easier to avoid." Marin looked at the fire. "Why are you going to the coast?" Celine was quiet for a moment. "Someone there I haven't seen in a long time. My daughter." She said it the way you say things that have been carried a long time. Carefully, like something you're not sure the air can hold. "She was at the coast when the stability designations went in. I was here." Marin looked at her. 4 years? 4.5. She had nothing to say that was adequate. She didn't try to say it. She just passed the flask back. The last day of the journey, the Kwarathi caught them. Not all of them, not through any failure of planning or route. Just bad timing, the kind that no map accounts for. A patrol drone that had been knocked off its route by a malfunction and was running a random sweep when it crossed their position on the ridge road above the coast. It came down fast, faster than the drones they'd encountered before, and it broadcast a containment signal. A low-frequency pulse that Marin felt in her back teeth before she recognized what it was. 3 more drones converged within 40 seconds. Marin put herself between the drones and her family. Old habit. She didn't think about it. The drones didn't fire or anything, they never did. They just formed a perimeter and hovered and waited. That sentient waiting. While the containment signal built to a pressure that made it difficult to think clearly. Kwarathi tech was elegant about this. It didn't hurt you. It just made you very tired and very willing to stop moving. Asha was the one who did it. Marin saw her daughter walk forward, not running, not panicking, walking with that minute careful step she used when she was doing something she'd already calculated. Map in one hand, and she held it up toward the nearest drone. She said something. The drone sensor turned toward her. Marin couldn't hear what Asha said. Later, when she asked, Asha said, "I told it we were a family migration, not a stability violation. A migration. Their own categories say migrations are permitted." She paused. "The word matters to them. It's in their own protocols. I read everything the network had about Kwarathi administrative language. The word for migration and the word for a stability violation are very different words, and they trigger different response trees. I just said the right word." The drones held for 19 seconds after Asha spoke. Then they withdrew. Marin stared at the space where they'd been. Then she looked at her daughter, who was refolding the map with the brisk efficiency of someone who has completed a task and moved on. "You read Kwarathi administrative language," Marin said. "You told me to learn the things you don't know," Asha said. "You've said that like 100 times. She hadn't said it nearly enough, apparently. They came over the last ridge just before noon and the coast opened beneath them. The water running gray-green under a high, thin sky, the old town stretched along the curve of the bay, the kind of light that felt like permission. Marin stopped at the top of the ridge and just looked at it for a moment. She couldn't help it. Some things earned a moment. Joran was waiting at the edge of town. He'd known they were coming. Someone in the network had passed word ahead, and he was standing at the old market gate with his hands in his pockets, and that expression he always had, the one that looked almost bored until you got close enough to see his eyes. He was thinner than she remembered. His hair had gone mostly gray. He looked at her coming down the road, and she watched something in his face do something complicated and then simplify into, "There you are." She walked the last 50 meters, and he put his arms around her without either of them saying anything, and she stood there in the grip of her brother's arms and felt 4 years of silence close behind them, like water. They stood like that for a long time. "You're late," he said finally against the top of her head. "We had to go under a building." "That sounds like you," she laughed. It sounded different than the laugh she'd made when she first heard the protected species broadcast. This one came from somewhere that still had things in it. The town was larger than she'd expected and more organized. The coast communities had developed something the inland settlements hadn't. Partly, she thought, because the water and the fishings gave them a material independence the land settlements didn't have. Partly because they'd had years to develop the kind of low-visibility social structure that could operate inside the Kwarathis' administrative categories without triggering their correction protocols. The Kwarathi were very good administrators. They were not particularly good at human adaptability. That was the thing, Mary thought, sitting that first evening on a dock with her feet over the water, and Asha beside her, and the whole town going about its complicated, invisible business behind them. That was the thing the Quarathi had never quite mapped. They'd cataloged human behavior at the species level. They understood population dynamics and resource consumption and mortality curves, and the broad strokes of what kept a group of humans stable over time. What they didn't understand, what 40,000 years of managing biospheres apparently hadn't taught them, was the specific texture of it. The way humans found the gap between the administrative categories and slipped through it sideways. The way a child could learn a bureaucratic language well enough to speak it back at the bureaucracy. The way the word for migration and the word for stability violation were, in a Quarathi legal framework, genuinely different words. And if you used the right one in the right context, the response tree simply went elsewhere. Not resistance, not rebellion, just navigation. Just being the thing they already were, persistently and specifically, in ways no census had quite anticipated. "Are you staying?" Joran asked, from somewhere behind her. Marin looked at the water. "For a while. There are people here who need someone who can move through the corridor. Someone who knows the routes." She looked back at him. He wasn't quite meeting her eyes, the way he never quite met her eyes, when he was asking her something he thought she might say no to. "You mean a guide," she said. "I mean someone who can get families from the interior to the coast. There are a lot of people who want to come and don't know how." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at Asha, who had the map out again, and was comparing it to something she'd found in Joran's town. An older chart, she thought, something with more detail on the tunnels. Asha and some of Joran's people were already talking over it, heads together, her daughter's low murmur and their voices making a sound that was neither planning nor conversation, but something between the two. "She'd need to be part of it," Marin said. "Obviously," Joran said. "And Bertus. He knows more about the terrain than anyone. He'll complain about it the whole time, but he'll do the work." Obviously. She looked back at the water. It was going gold now as the sun dropped. The phosphorescence the Quarathi had done to the water table did something particular to coastlines at this hour. It made the surf glow faintly, a soft blue-green in the curl of the waves, the light coming from inside the water rather than reflecting off its surface. Beautiful, she thought again. Still a cage, both things true at once. 40,000 years of managing biospheres, she said, mostly to herself. What? That's how long the Quarathi have been doing this, managing protected species. 40,000 years of experience. She paused. They're very good at it. Joran sat down beside her. But they've never managed us before. She said it without heat, without triumph even. Just as a fact, the way you'd state the mineral content of a soil sample or the load tolerance of a bridge. They'd never managed humans before. They'd come in with their census categories, and their response trees, and their careful, sincere commitment to the well-being of the species in their care, and they'd done everything right by every metric they had, and they had still, somehow, persistently, not quite accounted for the specific texture of what humans were. What humans were. People who drew maps of places they weren't supposed to go. People who learned the administrative languages of their administrators. People who, given a choice between the comfortable pond and the uncertain route, would choose the route, not because the pond was bad, and not because the route was safe, but because the route was theirs. Because moving was native to them in a way that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with something older and harder to name. The Quarathi called it instability. Marin thought it was probably just being human. Celine found her daughter on the third day. Marin didn't witness it. It was a private thing, and she was careful to keep it that way. But she heard from Joran's network that the reunion was in a small house near the north edge of town, and that there had been a significant amount of noise from the general direction of that house for about an hour that afternoon. Voices. And then something that wasn't quite either laughter or crying. And then laughter, definitely. She thought about the flask, the fruit-based chemistry, the way Celine had said my daughter with that particular carefulness, as if the words were something she'd been keeping intact through a long transit. She thought about a lot of things that night, sitting watch at the dock with the glowing water, and the sound of her sleeping family at her back. She thought about 3 people in the Redstone ravines who were gone because she had confused caution with wisdom. She thought about everything that had moved since then, all the terrain that had shifted while she stood still, and about everything that had moved because she finally stopped standing still. She thought about 40,000 years of experience meeting 11 seconds of a drone, recalculating its response tree. She thought about Asha's voice, level and certain, saying the right word. There was a woman named Gura in the town who had been a linguist before the Quarathi came. She was now, functionally, the most important person on the coast, possibly on the continent, because she had spent 4 years doing what Asha had done instinctively. Learning the administrative language at a technical level, mapping the categories, finding the seams between the words. She had 23 people working with her, all of them ex-academics of one kind or another, and they were building something that wasn't quite a library, and wasn't quite a legal practice, and wasn't quite a diplomatic corps, but was all of those things shaped around the specific topology of Quarathi administrative thought. Joran introduced her to Marin the following morning. Gura was small and precise, with reading glasses on a cord around her neck, and the kind of focus that made you feel slightly scrutinized even when she was looking somewhere else. She looked at Marin for a moment and said, "You came through the station at Grid 7. Yes, the maintenance crawlway, and then the containment drone event on the Ridge Road." She paused. "Your daughter, yes, I want to talk to her. She'll want to talk to you," Marin said. Fair warning, she already has ideas. Gura almost smiled. They always do. The ones who figure it out young, they always come in with ideas. That's the material we're working with. She looked out at the water. The Quarathi have 40,000 years. We have adaptation. We have the specific human capacity to find the seam in any system and work it until it opens. Is that enough? Gura was quiet for a moment. "I think it's the only thing that's ever been enough," she said. "For us. We've never had 40,000 years of anything. We've had stubbornness. We've had the ability to read a system from the outside and then change ourselves until we fit through it sideways." She paused. "We've had children who learn the language of whoever's in charge and speak it back at them, precisely, at exactly the right moment." Marin thought about that for a long time. That afternoon she took Asha to meet Gura. She waited outside. She could hear them through the open window, Gura's precise voice, and Asha's lower murmur, and the sound of maps being unfolded, and at one point both of them talking at once, interrupting each other, the way people talked when they were thinking together rather than in sequence. Pell found her there, leaning against the wall with her face tilted up toward the sky. "Good meeting," he said. "I think so." He stood beside her. They listened to the voices for a moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She thought about it. "Birds," she said. He waited. There were birds on the river, old kind, working the shallows. She paused. The Quarathi cataloged every species on this planet, every animal, every ecosystem. They documented migration routes, breeding populations, stress indicators. She paused again. They forgot to document that some species figure out how to read the documentation. Pell looked at her sidelong. "I'm saying the birds are fine," she said. "I'm saying we're all fine. I'm saying Asha is in there right now learning how to be finer." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Joran says there are families in the Kessler settlements who've been trying to get to the coast for 2 years. I know. He says they need a guide," she said. "I know. I'm going." "When?" She looked up at the sky. The Quarathi atmospheric processors were doing their thing with the dusk again. The bruised purple, the particular beauty of administered air. She looked at it and didn't feel the cage of it so acutely today. Maybe because she knew something today that she hadn't known a week ago. Something she'd suspected but not felt in the bone, that a cage was a static thing, and the people in it were not. "Soon," she said. "I want to map the new route first. Talk to Celine about the maintenance network she knows. There are 3 transfer stations between here and Kessler, and I want diagrams of all of them before I move anyone. Asha will want to come. Asha will be here. She has work to do." He made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite disagreement. She read it correctly. He thought Asha might have a different view on that, and he was probably right, and they would have that conversation when it was time to have it. Marin looked at the sky a moment longer. Then she went inside to look at the maps. The Kessler run took 3 weeks to plan and 4 days to execute. Marin brought Celine, Pell, and a young man from Joran's network named Kassan, who knew the western approach to the second transfer station well enough to navigate it in the dark. They brought 11 people out of Kessler. 2 families with children, a group of elderly academics who moved slowly and needed 3 rest stops, and a single man who gave his name as Voran, and spoke very little, and carried nothing except a set of notebooks that he would not discuss. The academics turned out to be the most useful people on the entire route. They had spent decades studying the Qurathi's cataloging methodology as a scholarly discipline, the way linguists study the grammar of a language they cannot speak natively. And they had insights about the transfer station sensor architecture that Marin had not previously had access to. The middle transfer station, the one she'd been most worried about, turned out to have a gap in its coverage that was entirely predictable from the underlying logic of Qurathi's spatial reasoning. Once you understood how they conceptualized volume. One of the academics, a small, fierce woman named Dr. Ott, who had written her dissertation on Quarathi administrative epistemology, walked Marin through the gap in 30 minutes of brisk explanation, and Marin said, "You need to talk to Gura." "Who is Gura?" said Dr. Ott. "You need to talk to Gura," Marin said again. "They made the coast in 4 days. Joran met them at the gate. He counted heads," he said. 11, Marin said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else, he didn't need to. She did 6 more runs over the following months. The routes got cleaner with each one, the gaps better documented, the timing better calibrated. Gura's network grew. Dr. Ott joined it and promptly began reorganizing it in ways that were initially alarming and ultimately more efficient. Asha, who had, as Pell predicted, a different view on staying behind, was permitted to join the 3rd run, under conditions, and navigated the 2nd transfer station using a procedural argument in Quarathi administrative language that Gura called elegant and Marin called nerve-wracking. The Quarathi noticed eventually. Of course they did. They were very good administrators, and they had 40,000 years of experience. But the thing about a gap in a system is that pointing at it doesn't close it. The gap existed because Quarathi spatial reasoning had certain structural assumptions built into it, and those assumptions were accurate for every other species they'd ever managed. And addressing them would require not a protocol update, but a fundamental rethink of how they categorized movement itself. A rethink that would take time. Quarathi operated on very long timescales. Humans operated on the timescale of a child learning a bureaucratic language and using it at exactly the right moment. There was a night, 6 months after they arrived at the coast, when Marin sat on the dock again, with Ashab beside her, and Bertus behind them in a chair he had appropriated from Joran's kitchen, and refused to return. The water was glowing. The sky was doing its purple thing. Bertus was eating an apple and making small sounds of either contentment or complaint. With Bertus, the difference was academic. "Do you miss the basin?" Asha asked. Marin thought about it. "I miss the quiet of it," she said. "Early mornings haunt, and I don't miss it," Asha said. "I miss the map of it. That's different." Marin looked at her daughter. "I mean," Asha said, "I like knowing where things are. I like having the shape of a place in my head. But you don't need to be in a place to have its map. You can carry the map and go somewhere else." She was folding the new map as she said this, the expanded one, the one that now covered 700 kilometers of the Eastern Corridor, with all of its soft zones and tunnel systems and transfer station gaps, the one that was probably the most detailed document of its kind on the continent. She folded it with the quick practiced movement of someone who had been folding maps since they were 8 years old. Marin watched her. "Where are you going next?" Asha asked. Marin looked at the water, the glow of it, the specific alien-administered light that was simultaneously beautiful and a reminder of everything that had changed. Both things at once, neither canceling the other. "There are settlements north of Kessler Corridor," she said. "Nobody's mapped the routes yet." Asha opened the map back up. "I'll start tonight," she said. Bertus finished his apple and threw the core into the water, which produced a small phosphorescent splash, and said, "I would like to note for the record that I have been extremely helpful on all of these expeditions, and I think this deserves formal acknowledgement." "It's acknowledged," Marin said. "I want it in writing." "No. I carried a grown man's worth of navigational equipment through a drainage ditch. You complained about it the entire time. Complaining and unhelpfulness are not the same thing. I would like that distinction formally recognized." Marin reached back and put her hand briefly on his knee, the way she'd done since she was small. Not quite a pat, not quite a grip, just contact, just, "I know." He went quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was satisfied, which was the only kind of quiet Bertus ever produced. The stars were coming out. The real ones, the old ones, indifferent to the Quarathi processors and the stability protocols, and the 40,000 years of experience. The stars didn't care. The stars were just there. Marin sat between her daughter and her uncle and listened to the water and thought, "This is what we are. Not the victories, not the gaps in the sensor grids, not even the 11 people from Kessler, asleep somewhere in the town behind her. This specific thing. The way a family sits together on a dock in a world that has changed beyond recognition and talks about where they're going next. The way a child opens a map after dark not because she has to, but because she can't help it. The way even an old man who wants nothing more than a bed and a window and someone bringing him soup will carry navigational equipment through a drainage ditch if his family needs him to. The Quarathi had a word for it. Marin had looked it up. After Asha started working with Gura's group, the Quarathi word for humans, their administrative category, the one that appeared on all the official documentation, translated approximately as the restless kind, not derogatory, just descriptive. They'd noticed it early and logged it accurately. They just hadn't understood yet what it meant to be cataloged by something that would not stay cataloged. Asha was still drawing when Marin finally went to sleep. When she woke in the morning, the map covered the floor, updated and extended, reaching now toward the Northern Territories, into the unmapped spaces where more families were waiting for someone to find the route through. Her daughter was already planning the path.